Hi, I'm John Massey, and as an investment advisor, my partner and I decided to do an in-depth study of the economy to see just how bad it really was. And it was so startling what we found that I thought I would use the magic of online video to bring our results out. So first off, you look at the chief problem among all of them, and that is our national debt. And our national debt is so huge, it is completely beyond comprehension. If you were to take our debt and take every dollar and convert that over into seconds, that would be 500,000 years worth of seconds. If you were to take our national debt and convert it over into just inches, those little tiny inches, you could go to the moon and back over 500 times. In fact, you could go to the sun and back and still have enough inches left over to make it halfway again to the sun. And so this is a number that is so vast that we just can't comprehend it. You know, we can take a stack of $100 bills and look at that and comprehend $10,000. We could even stack so many onto a pallet. This is $100 million, and we can kind of comprehend that. But if you were to take all of those pallets and stack them into rows and columns side by side, you would end up with a platform that was as long as a football field, considerably wider, and half as tall as the Statue of Liberty. I mean, this is a number of $100 bills, $100 million pallets that is just beyond our comprehension. So that's a big part of the problem. Let's make it simpler. Now I'm going to take the 2011 budget, where we made $2.3 trillion in revenues, spent $3.8 trillion, this sort of a thing. And let's instead imagine that Sam comes to you. Sam lives up on the hill. And Sam says, hey, I want to borrow some money. I'm an investment advisor, so I say, I got some people, maybe they'll lend you some money. Why don't you tell me your figures? And he says, well, I make $230,000 a year. And I spend $380,000 a year, and I have to borrow the remaining, which is over $150,000 a year. Now, I'm a professional. I know exactly the types of questions to ask. So I go, I'm sorry, you did what? Are you insane? What are you talking about? You can't borrow that much money. And he says, well, you know, when you look at it, it really works out, because I got this thing called mandatory spending. And I've made certain obligations, okay? Even though I make $230,000 a year, $220,000 of mandatory spending comes out of my check before I ever see it. I really, after that, I only make $10,000 a year. That's $196 a week. And I spend $3,000 a week. What's a guy to do? Clearly, I've got to borrow that amount of money, right? So I say, well, this is insane. What kind of a debt have you built up doing this? He says, well, basically $1,500,000, a little bit more than that. He says, but, you know, I've got obligations. And if you factor in those obligations, it's really $6 million. So let's see, you're making $10,000 a year after all of these obligations, and you have $6 million coming up that you've got to pay off. So, well, that doesn't make any sense. And he says, well, you know, these unfunded obligations, for instance, I have a business, and they have a pension fund, and I borrowed $250,000 from the pension fund. And you know, all of these people are starting to retire, and I'm going to have to start covering not only that $250,000, but all of these other millions and millions of dollars that I really don't have any money in there to cover. And I say, so what's your plan? He says, well, I'm going to borrow it. And he says, well, what's going to happen when all that money comes due? Well, I'll just borrow that. Well, what about the interest on the debt? Well, I'll just borrow that. See, this is an insane plan, and this is exactly the plan that we're working on for the U.S. economy. Now, the problem is that I wouldn't lend Sam any money. I would report Sam to the FBI, and under normal circumstances, they'd put him in prison for this kind of a thing. Any corporation doing this would be thrown into prison, because if you look up the definition of a Ponzi scheme, that says you're using money from people who have just invested to pay people who have already invested instead of using real profit. So that means that I'm in a position where I have to borrow money now from people to pay off the other investors that had loaned me money before. And as we all know, Ponzi schemes just degenerate and go out of control. That's exactly what is happening to the U.S. economy. In fact, it even gets worse. The White House came out and says, well, the mandatory spending is going to exceed all of our revenues right around the corner, 50 years ahead of schedule. See, we had scheduled that event. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. And if we don't understand the mathematics of it, we can't quite understand exactly how bad it is. So, give you an idea, Albert Einstein says the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Wasn't a black hole or something like that. Let's take an experiment. We're going to jar. We take a single bacterium, we put it into the bottom of the jar, and this bacterium will duplicate every minute. See, so in 1 minute it'll be 2, in 2 minutes it'll be 4, and so on. It'll compound this way. This is called compound growth. And we come back in that jar, and after 50 minutes has passed, and only 10 minutes to go until that jar is full, and all those bacteria are going to die when it's full because they got nowhere to expand into. And 10 minutes until death, you can see a little film growing on the bottom, and we flip through these, 7, 6 minutes. Still doesn't look like much, right? I got 5 minutes to go now. Albert Bartlett, Professor Albert Bartlett, who I stole this from, by the way, this experiment, he said the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand this exponential function that we're talking about. And we look at this. We got 5 minutes to go, right? 5 minutes to death. It doesn't look like it. I mean, jar's almost empty, right? And we're all laid back and we're thinking, hey man, it's all cool, because we've never done the math. 4 minutes to go, 3 minutes to go, 2 minutes to go, and now we start to say, wow, this is growing awful fast now. We got to have some programs to cut back and balance the budget and this kind of a thing. This is inappropriate. At this point in time, 59 minutes has elapsed and you got 1 minute to go, and you might as well shoot yourself at this point in time. What are you going to do? See, that's why it's our greatest shortcoming, is because we sit around and wait for this kind of death. And we wait until there's about 10 seconds to go and the jar's pretty much filled up, and then we have the proper reaction. Now, if we did the math, when should we, if we were these bacteria, have had this proper reaction that we're looking at here? Well, how about when they put us in a jar and explained the whole deal to us? We could have done the math and said, wait a second, we're going to die in an hour given that, just do the math, and then we'd be flipping out on the front side. Maybe give us a little bit of time to do something about it. Now, this whole compound growth thing, this graph right here is exactly the same thing as that jar. It's 15 times doubling. And we compare that to our federal debt, and what do we see? Uh-oh. See, this debt goes up at a geometric rate. Now, that's a tremendous problem. Alan Greenspan said deficit spending is simply a scheme for the confiscation of wealth, and he should know because he's one of the major confiscators that there are out there. So we have this idea of a maximum debt, okay? Well, where is that limit? Where's that point where that maximum debt hits? Paul O'Neill was Secretary of Treasury 2001. He said, when you get extended to a point where you can't service your debt, you're finished, kaput, that's it, you're done. See, definition of service is to pay interest on money that you have borrowed from someone. So let's take a look at the interest. Congressional Budget Office told us in 2010 to expect a 4-fold increase in net interest payments over the next 10 years. From $197 billion in 2010 to $778 billion in 2020. Well, so let's do the math. If our income is 2.3 trillion, and it is, and our interest payment is 778 billion, this represents 33% of our national income, our revenues from all of these taxes that we have, going towards interest alone. It's the same thing that happens to an individual when he gets buried in debt. The payments, he couldn't live off of the money he was making, so he goes out and borrows money. Now, he not only has to live off the money he's making, but he has to take a chunk out of it and pay for that interest and pay for the principal back. It doesn't work, see? So we have this idea of maximum debt. Well, this was interesting because Greenspan says the U.S. may be reaching this area of the debt limit, the maximum debt. He says, look, there it is, coming up. Okay, so the problem is that most of us are still sitting around going, hey man, everything's all cool. Life is going along like normal, right? Some of us are sitting there and we're all worried about it, but if we do the math, if we understand the scenario, we need to be like this, because this has become imminent. By all indications, the wheels are coming off right now, and this little thing that happened in 2008, which was basically a complete meltdown, most people don't understand that, was just a little blip on the radar compared to what is coming up to us. And I really hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but you know, I have heard 100 people say, isn't it horrible, the debt that we've built up and the problem that we've left for our children? But we didn't really do the math, because we didn't do it to our children, we did it to us. Because it is occurring right now. We've broken this up into 3 parts, and we're going to explain a lot more of what's going on and the exact source of this problem in the next video. And then in the 3rd video, we're going to actually, after having run you into the ground on all of this bad news, show you what we can do to actually solve that problem. You will be very, very surprised to find out the source of these problems. So hang on for the next video.